Donald Trump is officially the 45th President of the United States. In this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups, I sit down with one person who knows about politics and history, Damon Fordham. Damon!
Yes, sir.
It is so good to see you.
It's good to see you also.
I appreciate this. We see each other all the time on the streets.
Yeah, I'm doing quite a variety of things nowadays, you know.
And really giving people a lot of common sense to what's going on right now. I want to take you to your Facebook page because you actually posted this 12 hours ago on Facebook.
Oh, wait, before we get into that, for those of you who watching this who don't know who I am, I'm Damon Fordham. I'm a local former radio broadcaster, newspaper columnist, historian, and public educator. I'm currently teaching U.S. history, African American history and world history at Charleston Southern University. I'm also a registered tour guide, and I have a book signing coming up. So, now that they know that, fire away.
Okay. January 20th, 2017. Days like this help me appreciate my dad. As some of you know, he was a calm man, given to reason and dignity in the face of adversity. Having survived the Great Depression, World War II, and segregation, he always tended to put things in perspective. So when Dr. King warned us against, quote, drinking from the cup of bitterness and wallowing in the valley of despair, unquote, I often think of my father's example. As we say right now, Damon, if your dad were alive right now, how would he put the Donald Trump presidency into perspective?
He would, knowing his political and social beliefs, he would not be happy with it, but at the same time, he would not be happy with a lot of the reaction to it right now. Because you see, this, unfortunately, while I am not a supporter of President Trump, I still believe that things should be handled in a certain way, you see, and that people should have a strategy for things, and a correct strategy, and an agenda, and something that is coherent and makes sense. People were hoping that Mr. Trump would lose the election initially, and everybody figured, oh, it's a shoo-in, Hillary Clinton's going to win. And for the sake of posterity, for the people watching this in the future, we're talking about the 2016 elections versus Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and Trump won. Anyway, so when he won, they were caught off guard. And unfortunately, because Mr. Trump has said a lot of things against the Mexicans, the Muslims, as well as women, blacks, etc., and so forth, a lot of people were horrified at a lot of people figured that America would not possibly elect a man of this type of crudity. But unfortunately, none of us are prophets. We don't have crystal balls, and so therefore he won. And a lot of people were just so shocked and horrified that they just lost their minds. You had grown people crying in the streets, and people acting with all of this despair and misery, and people literally lost hope. And I even heard talk of people who were downright suicidal over this. This is not the way. And as we're having this conversation some 4 hours after the inauguration on January the 20th, 2017, you have this rioting going on in Washington, D.C. right now. And really, none of this makes any sense. I mean, so I don't think he would approve of that kind of, while he may not have approved of the Trump presidency, he would have not have approved of grown people just throwing in the towel and giving up hope and all this gloom, despair, and agony on me on one end, and this violence and rioting on the other end, because none of that's productive.
Let me continue with your letter.
Sure, go ahead.
You said the following quote, over 2 months after the election, I get that many people are still very sad, confused, angry, and do not really know what to do about a Trump presidency. A lot of people are lashing out in misdirect anger, but we have to remember that the children are watching us, and we are the source of their lessons and coping skills. What will they learn by seeing adults fall apart over this? When Dr. King spoke in my city on July 30th, 1967, he cried out, quote, somebody has to have some sense in this world, unquote. What do you do about a presidency under Donald Trump?
Well, actually, I talked a little bit about that later in this letter, but the short version of it is, first of all, you have to sit back, breathe, and see if you can, just kind of walk away from the situation a little bit, and then think about and just kind of analyze this.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things that I've learned that a lot of Americans really do not understand how their own political system works. Because there was all this talk about having petitions to abolish the Electoral College.
Right.
And that's crazy, because the fact of the matter is the Electoral College is part of the 12th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States.
Right.
And as a constitutional amendment, you need 2/3 of the Senate and 2/3 of the House of Representatives and 3/4 of the states to approve to abolish a constitutional amendment, as was done with the prohibition against liquor back in 1933.
Right.
That's what it took in order to do that. Now, if these people actually thought that that would prevent Mr. Trump from becoming president, that was ridiculous, because 2 months is not enough time to do all of that stuff to begin with. And a petition in itself would not be effective in getting rid of that Electoral College. And finally, they wouldn't have even been talking about that had Mrs. Hillary Clinton won the election to begin with. So people have to really think and understand what they're talking about before they begin, or otherwise you'll be like Ray Charles leading Stevie Wonder down the street.
You talk about Hillary Clinton. A lot of people, even in the Democratic Party, basically said, hey, you had a loser as a candidate. When you hear that, what do you say?
Well, I can't say one way or another as far as what that goes, because I mean, the fact of the matter is that she did get 3 million more in the popular vote. But as was pointed out by one of my favorite newsmen, Bob Schieffer, this morning on CBS News, he mentioned the fact that Trump won 3 states by 77,000 votes.
Wow.
You know, it all reminds me of how back in 1972 there was a critic named Pauline Kael who wrote for the New York Times. And in that election of 1972, which is the first that I vividly remember as a child, Richard Nixon was running against a guy named George McGovern.
Right.
And all of the type of people who like Hillary Clinton today were the ones who were going for McGovern, and the type of people who like Trump were going for Richard Nixon. And Richard Nixon won 49 states. George McGovern didn't even win his own state. And Pauline Kael wrote that she was horrified because everybody I knew voted for Nixon. And that goes to show the type of bubbles that people are in right now, in that they tend not to talk to people who don't think like them. So that gives them a sort of strange view of how the world works. You see, that's not really accurate. I mean, you have people even with the third parties who really thought that they were going to throw this thing into the Electoral College when neither of the third party candidates got more than, Jill Stein only got 1 million or so votes,
right,
and Gary Johnson only got 3 million. So they are of no consequence whatsoever in the larger scheme of things. But yet to hear them talk, you'd think that they're these power brokers and all of that. See, this is the problem with social media. People need to talk with others who don't think of them and get a broad view of what the country and the world is really about, so they can think on a realistic and practical level.
Let me continue the letter. You said this: there are practical things that can be done. Harness that energy so that when the new president says things and enacts laws that offend your sense of decency, use your constitutional right to free speech and peaceable assembly to speak out. If you don't have the articulation to do so, look up the names and the contact information of your representatives in Washington, D.C. Organize and let your senators and congressmen and women know that going along with such wrong measures will mean they will be unemployed on election day. What else can people do?
Well, first of all, what you have to understand the system and how to get what you want within the system, okay? Because even though you have people who are rioting and rebelling, Dr. King warned in his last book, Where Do We Go From Here? And let me just say, too, that you can't talk about Dr. King if you just listen to the dream speech. You have to read what the man actually said in order to speak on this with any kind of authority. But he warned that a violent revolution in this country would never work unless you had the military turning against its own government. And he didn't see that happening anytime soon in 1968, and I don't see that happening anytime soon in 2017. So that means that you have to, if you're going to fight smart, okay? You have people now, they're throwing their anger against people who have met with the president or had agreed to perform at the president's inaugural.
Right.
Folks, half of y'all aren't even going to remember any of that stuff next week, because you see, that's one of those Facebook rants of the week that people, they get mad, they rant about something, and by the time the week is over with, they have already found something else to be mad at. Misdirected anger. What you do, you find the name of your representative, you find the name of your senator, you find out, how do I get in touch with them? And when the president comes up with these wrong measures or says these wrong things, you call that senator up, you call that House of Representative member up and say, hey, look, you work for me. If you do not curb some of these bad bills that are being passed, I will get together with my friends and vote you out. And nobody wants to be without a job.
The people who complain about the results but did not vote themselves must be educated to how politics works and organized to vote in 2018 and 2020 for better candidates. How will 2018 and 2020 look like in your mind?
Well, first of all, the reason why I said that in the first place is because Malcolm X was right in a speech that he made in June the 18th, 1964, that's in the book By Any Means Necessary, where he said that before you talk about voter registration, you need to talk about voter education. Because let me tell you this, people went about getting people to vote in the wrong way. They go to their churches and say, you vote for so-and-so, or pull the master lever. None of that employs thinking or strategy. That means one group ignores you because they know you're not going to vote for you, and the other group takes you for granted because they know you are going to vote for you, and then you have a large mass that gets disinterested in either one and doesn't vote. That's a lose-lose strategy. And back in 2008, when I was going around helping registered people to vote, I went out on Reynolds Avenue, Rivers Avenue, Sproul Avenue, getting the street people who never participated in politics to register to vote. And almost to a one, after the election day, they came up to me and said, Mr. Fordham, how come you didn't tell me I had to vote for the senators and the congressmen and read the constitutional amendments? And I'm like, well, gee, I thought y'all knew that. And see, this is the problem. When we register people to vote, we have to remember that a lot of them do not grow up in homes where they watch the news or learn about politics. They go by hearsay that they get on Facebook or in the barbershop or in the beauty parlor. So it's up to us to educate people on the fact that they have to vote on senators, House of Representative members, constitutional amendments, going to council meetings and all of that sort of thing. Be educated to the political process. And to those who say, man, Mr. Fordham, I ain't got that kind of education, I don't know nothing about that, hold up. If you can tell me who's going to be in the NBA playoffs or who's going to the Super Bowl and all that, how do you know that stuff? You study that stuff. So the same way you can study that stuff, the same way you can study this, which is something that will make a real difference in your life.
Finally, as the events that I mentioned that my father survived show, we have been through far worse. The only ways things could get good or bad depends on what the people are willing to allow. As an old Chinese proverb said, quote, it is better to light a candle than curse the darkness, unquote. So what should people allow?
They should allow for themselves to be motivated, want to do something once these things like this happen. But once again, that's not going to happen unless they know how this thing works. And secondly, I spoke with a young activist about 2 weeks ago, and he said, Mr. Fordham, I've never seen the people as divided as they are now. And I said, what? I said, listen, you know what? Back in the 60s, you didn't have just these small riots where these shopping districts are getting broken into. Whole neighborhoods of cities burned down in hundreds of cities at the same time. You had people literally fighting each other in the streets and having to call out the National Guard, fighting over the Vietnam War, fighting over civil rights and things of that sort. This stuff that we're dealing with, as bad as it is nowhere near the turmoil that we faced back in the 1960s. And even President Obama himself said that when he was overseas at one of these conferences when these policemen were getting shot over here during the summer. So this is where history comes in. And this is why it's important to know history. Because without history, you're going to take a lot of things out of context, and you will also be misled by those who don't have your best interest at heart with false news that have you going east when you should be going west.
Damon Fordham, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.